Thank you. Before we get started, some important notices. Live interpretation is available for this session in Kazakh and Russian. All you need to do is to use the handsets at your disposal. Please also note that this session is live streamed on YouTube and will also be available on replay. We will address your questions here in the room after our panel discussion, and we'll also address the questions of the audience online. And all you need to do if you're watching us online and would like to send some questions is to send them to us via the chat box. Time now to welcome our host here today, Norbert Funke.
Charlotte, thank you very much for the very kind introduction. Good morning, honorable guests, ladies and gentlemen, and also good morning to our colleagues online. A very warm welcome to this panel discussion on the occasion of the IMF's Regional Economic Outlook for the region, which is being released essentially as we speak. We are very honored that National Bank Governor Timur Suleymanov is with us today for some opening remarks, and we are also very honored by our other distinguished guests, including from the Foreign Ministry here in Kazakhstan. Thank you very much for joining us. I really would like to use this occasion to thank the Kazakh authorities, our other 8 member countries, and our development partners for the superb support of CCAMTEC, the Caucasus, Central Asia, and Mongolia Regional Capacity Development Center. Without this support, without the support of a host country and you, Governor, and other senior officials, it would not have been possible to set up the center during COVID and to be where we are. And our ambition is to make it a 21st century capacity development center, the center of excellence for the region. Governor Suleymanov doesn't need many words of introduction. He has been governor since 2023, was previously the first deputy head in the in the office of the president of Kazakhstan, and also in his prior life was Minister of National Economy and held different positions in the private and public sector. So without much further ado, Governor, thank you very much for joining us today. Let me welcome you again.
Thank you very much, dear Mr. Funke. It's a pleasure to be here, and it's a pleasure to see lots and lots of faces from across the region. And I was thinking about when I was preparing for the opening speech. I was of course as always I was faced with 2 opportunities: just have an informal one, but then I decided that this is the first time I'm doing this, and so I need to be a little bit more in-depth in introductory remarks. So let me follow the second option. So let me start. Distinguished colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Warm welcome in Almaty, in Kazakhstan, at CCAMTEC, the office of CCAMTEC, which is a good friend, which is a good foundation for that underpins our long-standing mutually beneficial relationship with the IMF. I would like to extend my warmest regards to Mr. Azour, who is a good friend of Kazakhstan. He's a great friend of the region as well. So every time we go to Washington, whether for fall meetings or spring meetings, we meet with him, we sit down, we discuss, we enrich each other's experiences, and I think, and we leave Washington and IMF headquarters with better knowledge and better understanding. So for your ongoing and strong support to the region, thank you very much, Mr. Azour. Well, past year has tested us all with respect to the resilience of economics across the region, across the world. A lot of changes in terms of trade policies, fiscal policies. Of course, technological progress is one of the things that we as regulators, as decision makers, have to be aware of. Yet Kazakhstan and most of our neighbors have demonstrated remarkable adaptability. In Central Asia, economic activity has also been more dynamic than expected. Strong domestic demand, remittance inflows and energy export have supported growth across the region. Our region now faces the task of transitioning from short-term drivers of growth to more stable and long-term foundation. Inflation is still high in many of the countries, Kazakhstan is included. Probably we have the highest inflation, unfortunately. That's why, and we still remain sensitive to global events. This makes it essential to build stronger institutions, credible policies, and more diversified economies. And of course, that calls for regional economic integration to be stronger as the region and less dependent on, as I mentioned, global trends and tendencies. For Kazakhstan, these regional trends are very relevant. Our economy is growing at solid pace, at 6.5%. Growth for the year expected to be around, more than 6%, with a moderate slowdown in the coming years, but still remaining at about 5%. Our GDP per capita is expected to reach nearly $15.7 per year, surpassing most of our neighbors, not only neighbors to the south, but also to the north, Russia and China. And this is not just a statistical milestone. It is a reflection of steady reforms, private sector dynamism, and growing regional integration. As I mentioned, inflation remains high. The growth is high, inflation is high. That's why we had to raise our base rate to 18% during our last committee meeting. Demand is outpacing the supply growth, and expansion in fiscal policies led to the inflation being pretty high. Of course, we do understand and acknowledge that. That's why on the fiscal side, Kazakhstan continues to pursue fiscal consolidation. The government initiated new reforms by introducing tax and budget codes, and they will become effective next year. The initiatives include VAT increase, doing away with some of the inefficient tax exemptions, limiting national fund transfers. That will decrease the non-oil deficits, support stronger revenue, and consequently improve fiscal balance. Our external position is stable. The current account deficit is at 3.9 billion in the first half of the year. At the same time, gross international reserves stand at 121 billion US dollars. That supports our overall macroeconomic stability. At the National Bank, our priority remains to maintain price and financial stability, and of course, with the due regard for sustainable economic and social development. We are strengthening our monetary transmission mechanism, enhancing analytical capacity, and improving coordination with the fiscal authorities. As I mentioned, fiscal was one of the key drivers for inflation. That's why coordination and talking to each other, understanding each other's moves is very important. We're also investing in heavily, I would say, in digital transformation, from modern payment infrastructure to exploring feasibility of digital tenge. And it's written here, exploring possibility. We actually have introduced digital tenge. We use it, not in the everyday, not on the retail side, but on the wholesale side. The digital tenge is not just, it's not even a pilot. It's the third form of national currency. We use it to control and program public expenditures. Kazakhstan's commitment to prudent macroeconomic management is underpinned by broader structural reforms, including the development of capital markets, advancing of green finance, and diversification from hydrocarbons. Our partnership with the IMF has been a cornerstone of this progress. I say it proudly, and it's not just a figure of speech. We do acknowledge that IMF has been a very strong partner. As a host and one of the major contributors to CCAMTech, we take pride of being a regional hub, and we once again thank the IMF leadership, the leadership of the countries that entrusted us, Kazakhstan and Central Bank, National Bank of Kazakhstan, in particular, with this important role of being the regional hub. Today's event offers us valuable opportunity to take stock of the recent trends and developments across the Central Asia. We're more than happy to listen to our friends and colleagues from other countries in order to see what we can do together, how we advance the regional economic cooperation together. And overall, I would like to wish all of us a very, very successful workshop, great new friendships, great new partnerships, and let's try and make our region better together. Thank you.
Many thanks, Governor. Many thanks, Norbert, of course.
Thank you very much. Yes, thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. And may I now please ask the honourable panellists to come and join us here on stage under a warm round of applause, of course. Thank you. A very warm welcome to all of you. Let me introduce you to our distinguished guests. To my left, Jihad Azour, Director, Middle East and Central Asia Department at IMF. We are also joined by Arif Ali, who's CEO at KICB. Aziza Umarova, thank you for being with us this morning. You are Head of Delivery of the Delivery Unit at the Agency for Strategic Reforms under the President of Uzbekistan. And also joining us this morning is Akylzhan, Baimagambetov, Deputy Governor at the National Bank of Kazakhstan. So once again, thank you for being with us this morning. And Jihad, we are going to start this conversation with the good news and the fact that the outlook for the region has been revised upwards, the 2025 outlook for the region, despite the global context, one of uncertainty, as highlighted by the Governor earlier. What are the key drivers behind this growth for the region?
Charlotte, thank you very much. Great pleasure to be here in Almaty, such a beautiful place, and to host you here at the CCAMTAC, the Technical Assistance Center that serves the region. Well, yes, this year is a year of, I would say, it's a tale of two cities. If you look at the developments, most of the developments were challenging this year. Wars, high level of policy uncertainty worldwide, including also some challenges related to issues that are relevant to the region with the energy policy or the oil policy that have changed over the course of the year. Therefore, you have a list of events that were, most of them, challenging, and you have a result in terms of economic performance that is promising. Three things I would like to highlight. One, growth has exceeded expectations in most of the countries in the CCA, in the Caucasus and Central Asia, despite the various challenges we saw. And also, it's the third or fourth year in the row where we have a level of growth that exceeds 5% on average in the region. Therefore, strong and sustained level of growth driven by several factors that we can discuss later. The second point is in most of the countries, it came this year with a pickup in inflation. And this is an issue that needs to be addressed. And three, we are still in a moment where uncertainty is extremely high, and we have a list of risks that are still tilted to the downside. What are those risks? The first one is second round effect of the trade measures that could have negative impact on the outlook of the region. The other type of risk is risk of pickup in inflation that could lead to hiking of interest rate globally. Third level of risk is higher volatility in the oil market, especially that the OPEC Plus accelerated unwinding of the cuts is already leading to more than 2 additional million barrel a day in the market. Therefore, we have to be careful about the risks. And 2025, as we turn into 2026, is a year where we expect growth to soften gradually, yet still around 4 to 4.5% on average. And we expect that this transformative moment could be, and this is something that I hope we will have the opportunity to discuss later, this is a moment of change. This is a moment of transition, and could be a moment of opportunity for the region. When we met with the authorities 2 weeks ago in DC, we discussed some of those opportunities. Connectivity is going to be a game changer for the region, especially with the developments we see globally. And not only connectivity in terms of moving goods and moving maybe energy, but also technology. Technology is an important dimension that could be an important driver for growth. In addition to that, regional integration is also a reality that is happening. We see this when we discuss, and we see this over time. And there are some positive developments. The improvement of relationship between Armenia and Azerbaijan is an opportunity to see greater integration and a market that could grow because of additional cooperation. Therefore, again, it's a mixed picture. There are some challenges still, important ones, that need to be addressed. But also, I think it's one of the few places in the world where you see certain number of important opportunities that one could seize.
So that's the key word here, opportunities. Thank you so very much for that. Deputy Governor, inflation. Inflation has increased across most CCA economies in 2025, including here in Kazakhstan, of course. So from a central bank perspective, what contributed to this increase, and what are the implications for central banks across the region, according to you?
Charlotte, thank you for the question. Yes, in many CCA countries, inflation is rising. As Jihad already said, it's one of the key words with the growth, but also inflation. And Kazakhstan, no exception. If we try to analyze our situation here in Kazakhstan, yes, last footprint for inflation for September, inflation reached 12.9%. It's quite high number, yeah, and especially compared to 8.6 in the end of last year. If we try to analyze what is from the component perspective, food inflation, it's above 12%, 12.7, services 15.3, and non-food goods slightly less than 11%. But what the main maybe factors? From one side, it's some external rise in food prices over the globe. The FAO index, it's quite high. High inflation in our neighboring countries, especially from the north, from the Russia, with quite high inflation and ruble appreciation, which also create some additional pressure for our FX. But also a lot of domestic factors. And here we see some mixed picture. From one side, it's maybe not so good, but which is going with the growth, it's high consumer demand, and which is feeding by quite high pace growth of consumer lending here, and we made some measures on that side. But also, government now in a position to deliver some structural reform, which is promising disinflationary, but in mid and long term, but has a huge pro-inflationary effect in short term. I will list some of them. First of all, it's about the tariff reform. It's for utilities tariffs, for heating, for water supply, for electricity itself, etc., etc. We have several decades of underinvestment in this industry, and some subdued prices for them, which was regulated by government, and now government trying to make this sector more investment attractive. And now we experience a few years in a row very, very high tariff utilities inflation above the 20, 25, 30%. It's not make my job easier, but it's very essential reform which should ensure us in better quality of the services for the long time in a row. What is more specific for this year it's too big another structural reform. Government announced, first of all, fuel price deregulation and liberalization, and it's really, you can imagine the fuel, it's what people consume every day. It's like a marker, price marker for them from one side, from other side, in such big country like in Kazakhstan, with a huge geographically length fuel, it's a very important component of the cost of everything. And it creates some additional second round effects. And for example, since the June, the fuel prices already above the fuel inflation above the 11%, but it's create a huge second round effects. And other, it's about on the fiscal side. Yes, we have a quite fiscal stimulating policy, but government thinking smartly, and we trying to make, as governor said in his opening remarks, more stable, sustainable fiscal policy. And this year, government presented a new tax code and budget code in the parliament. It's already approved, both of them, and will be effective next year. But for example, one of the main changes is the VAT tax increase from 12 to 16%. It's of course create a huge effect on the prices, on inflation. When it was announced in February, and now we wait in second wave in the end of this year, beginning of next year, when tax code will be effective, and it's create some pressure on prices, on maybe more important on inflation expectation. This channel is also important. But we believe that in midterm and long term, it will be more responsible and more sustainable fiscal policy, create more disinflationary effect. But we should go through that. And what implication for central banks? Yes, Kazakhstan not alone, who experience the more high inflation, and I believe in that terms more responsible, maybe not more tighter. Every central bank understand the situation, but it should be more cautious. Maybe don't ease too fast and think before. Monetary policy should be more data-driven in that case. And from other case, it might be a good time to make some focused macroprudential measures in several areas. For example, we're trying to do on that side, and I believe it's also create some, when you try to cool in some sectors which overheating without overheating the economy. Thank you.
Many thanks for going through all the drivers of inflation here in Kazakhstan and across the region, Deputy Governor. And of course, strong domestic demand has been a driver of inflation, of course. So, Arif Ali, over the past years, robust credit growth has been a key driver of domestic demand and growth across all CCA economies, including the Kyrgyz Republic. So from your perspective, what explains this trend, and how are banks balancing credit expansion with asset quality and risks?
Thank you, Charlotte. I would say banks are not the driver, especially in Kyrgyzstan. It's a demand-driven growth. Kyrgyzstan has grown over 9% over the last 2 to 3 years. And this year, it's growing at a rate of 11 to 12%. So, and that's led a lot by government investment in infrastructure, huge amount of construction. If you go to the south side of Bishkek, it looks like Dubai in the early 2000s. I mean, there are like cranes everywhere. And the government is trying to obviously build in electricity infrastructure, water, roads. So there's a lot of investment. On top of that, salaries in the government sector have risen by almost doubled in the last 3 years. And this year, they're expected to go up by another 45%. So a lot of this demand is, I mean, obviously it's creating a lot of demand in the private sector. And that's where the banks have come in. They've supported that demand. Loans have tripled in the last 3 years. And on top of that, as Deputy Governor has just said, consumer lending is now 40% of the balance sheet, where it was non-existent 3 to 4 years ago. So we are experiencing a huge amount of consumer lending supported by obviously digital products where it's easy to get a small loan online so people don't have to go to banks. And all the banks are supporting that. But the great thing to see is that NPLs in the sector have still not become unwieldy. Kyrgyzstan has always been, especially in the public sector banks, NPLs have remained very high. But if you look at the private sector banks, NPLs at about 4 to 5%. I mean, our bank is at about 2.5%. Despite this growth in the last, I mean, we have quadrupled our balance sheet in the last 4 years. Quadrupled it. And NPLs have actually gone down. So there is a strong focus on obviously credit, but it's difficult to see. I mean, inflation is obviously rising. The central bank has tightened its rate just a couple of days ago to about 10%. We are still the lowest in the region. I think Kazakhstan, obviously, as Deputy Governor said, is 18%. Uzbekistan, 14%, I think, something like that. We need to tighten up a little bit more because inflation is going up. But being a smaller country with, much less sort of, obviously, it's not an oil-driven economy. It's not a population-driven economy. There's 7 million people compared to our neighbors. We are much smaller. So the government is trying to encourage consumption. I'm not sure if that's a great thing, I must say. But definitely by raising public sector salaries, it's affecting that.
Thank you for sharing some very impressive statistics around consumer growth here. Aziza, now, the October Regional Economic Outlook report by IMF contains some analysis showing that CCA economies are undergoing structural changes that are likely to have increased their long-term growth potential. So I'd like to know if you agree with this conclusion, first of all, and if you do, what are the main reforms and policy measures that you think may have contributed to greater long-term growth potential?
Thank you so much, Charlotte. I was participating several years ago in the big reform of the transport. Maybe we could just take this as one of the illustrations of how the structural reforms can actually boost the economic growth. In the area of aviation in Uzbekistan, we had for a very long time very good company because we were actually the second to Russians to fly directly to JFK, and we still do it, 5 flights a week from Tashkent. But we had, in a way, sort of monopoly. And I think it was a very painful decision to realize that once you create not the capacity building of the local carrier, but rather developing the markets, you will see actually the much needed economic growth. I'm happy to share the figures that, first of all, now, as we speak today, we have 12 carriers that are being registered in Uzbekistan. So it was 1, now it's 12. And they all together basically are also contributing to tourism development and to export promotion, because every single transit passenger is export. And that brings you, hard currency. So the latest figure was this year, from January to August, we already had 8 million tourists, and it's 50% higher than the same period last year. We also, it was not also easy discussion, but we decided to go with the privatization of the airports, and we have already several airports out of 11 international airports in Uzbekistan that are being managed now by private operators. And of course, it also, was demonstrating how it's important to cut inefficiencies and really trust more to private sector. And that exactly goes back to recommendations of the report that we all read before coming here, that, this private-led economic growth is very important, and how to also reduce the state footprint in the economy. And now let me go to fundamentals. In Uzbekistan, we had for a very long time very omnipresent public state in the economy. I remember in 2021, it was around 55% of the economy. And I took an effort to calculate how much it generates employment. I did spend half a year at Harvard calculating how many jobs it actually creates. And I can share it's only 7% of the formal employment. The 7% of formal employment were generated by 55% of the economy. And I think the overall idea has been, for a very long time, since the president, Mirziyoyev, came to power in 2016, how to generate more jobs, how to create more income generation opportunities beyond the capital in the region. And what we see now is massive development of opportunities for businesses in the region to be able to employ more people through different schemes, starting from the loans all the way to the infrastructure development. And second very important thing I believe that I should share, the report also talked about the need for revisiting the public expenditure, the fiscal discipline. And that's very important as well. So what we've tried to do, to try to assess whether we are doing enough to have social impact from the public expenditures. We've done, in my team at the Agency for Strategic Reforms, the mapping of entire social infrastructure. We mapped all schools, all kindergartens, all healthcare facilities, water, sewage, internet roads, as well as the sports. And we put together a geoportal that enables to see, in the context of climate resilience, in the context of demographic change, migration, where we need to invest first, where the schools and kindergartens and roads should be built first. And this will help everyone in the government to have more criteria to assess before we invest any single public bucks tomorrow. What is also important, that it also enabled us to design new programs with a social impact. And I have to say I'm very proud and grateful to the President and Saida Shavkatovna. We've launched this year a big WASH program, hygiene and sanitation for schools, that will allocate around $90 million every year to bring sanitation and hygiene to schools, kindergartens, and healthcare facilities. And it would not be possible if we just realized, okay, let's try to prioritize. We cannot do everything without any data. We've collected data, we use data for policy design, and now we start policy implementation. Thank you so much.
That's a very interesting approach indeed, very human-centric. This social development mapping is a very interesting approach indeed. Thank you very much. So we have spent the first half of our discussion focusing on the state of play. Next, we're going to address, well, risks and policy priorities going forward. So Jihad, the original economic outlook, emphasizes that risks are primarily to the downside. Looking ahead, what key risks and challenges should CCA policymakers consider when implementing policies or reforms? What do they need to pay very close attention to?
Well, there are different sets of risks. There are the immediate risks or the short-term risks. We have mentioned them, or some of them. The first one is inflation. I think we are all converging that this growth is coming with an inflation that needs to be arrested and addressed. Otherwise, the whole benefit of growth could be at risk. And this requires to strengthen monetary policy instruments, independence of institutions, including central banks, and have fiscal policy supporting the consolidation. Those are important things in order to preserve the benefits that those countries have had over the last few years. The second one is uncertainty. Uncertainty could hit you with delay. So far, uncertainty did not have a big impact on the performance of the economies of the region, but uncertainty is still very, very high. And then it's very important to take into consideration the risk or risks that could emerge from this level of uncertainty. The impact of trade measures has been limited so far in terms of tariff impact or impact in terms of the trade relationship with the US. But there are certain second round effects that needs to be also analyzed. This is the short term. But I would say there are two important elements that are there. One is complacency. We see that these economies over the last few years were able to benefit from a higher level of growth than the average growth we saw in broader region. And the risk is to take those level of performance for granted. How to address this risk is to accelerate some of the structural reforms. We have done in 2022 a deep analysis on the role of state-owned enterprises, and I'm happy to see that Aziza was mentioning this dimension. Definitely, what would grow the economy of CCA is giving the private sector a leading role. Especially that technology has become in the region a key driving force. Therefore, accelerating the transformation of the role of the state is an important element to create jobs, create growth, and become less dependent on the state and less dependent on pro-cyclical fiscal policy. The second thing is we need to understand, Charlotte, that the world has changed and continue to change. What does it mean for the region? It means that what used to be in the past, those high-speed highways of trade and global value chains have changed. And now there is more value for connectors. And this region that used to be a landlocked region is becoming now a connector. Therefore, how to benefit from that? This means that we need to upgrade two things: infrastructure and connectivity, and institution. Those are two important elements in order for the region to gain benefit of those transformations. Not doing this would lead in the next couple of years to be a bit lagging behind. And the last one, and I would say the most important one, we are in a world where disruption is reality. Technology is changing our life, and it's going to change our life on a fast-track basis. We are in a region where technology has been harnessed and used, but I think we need to double down on that. Doubling down means that education has to adjust to this. Readiness on AI, readiness of the region is on the average of EMs. If you want to compete, you need to go up. Capital has to be mobilized and has to be put in use of those big transformation. A lot of investment was done in infrastructure. It's very important to make sure that in terms of overall financial stability, balance sheets are well preserved. This is an important dimension, especially that we had a lot of investment. If I take the case of Kyrgyz or Tajikistan or Uzbekistan, the level of investment that was put in infrastructure is immense. We need the soft structure to help those investments to bring the level of value that we expect at the beginning.
Thank you very much for that. So the roadmap is threefold really. It's keep reforming, reform faster, enhance the role of the private sector, and focus on innovation and soft infrastructure. Thank you so much for that. Now, Deputy Governor, as discussed in the outlook, many of the risks faced by the region are external in nature, including tighter global financial conditions, slower global growth, of course, and imported inflation pressures. So what are the implications of heightened global uncertainty and volatile financial conditions on CCA financial systems, and what policies can you implement to mitigate those risks?
Thank you. Yeah, these all global tensions and some uncertainty, global uncertainty, which created by all these things which Jihad already mentioned, tariffs, the trade negotiations, wars, etc., it's create a lot of different implications. For example, for the energy exporters in the region, it's create it's push on global demand and of course push on the oil prices, and it's a crucial factor for many countries in the region. From other side, it's bring gold prices to the all-time highs, which also create another implication, for example, for Uzbekistan. Yeah, it's different waves from all that implications, yes, and it's create, for example, particularly for us, this huge FX volatility in the ruble. It's also create, because we, for example, in our food import have origin from Russia. It's also create some pressure on food prices, for example, for Kazakhstan. Yeah, that's why. Yes, global conditions remain quite tight, and many major central banks pausing the policy easing, and it's also creates some, as you said, financial more tight conditions. But if we see our situation from the fiscal side, we have enough buffers, fiscal buffers. National Oil Fund and this budget and fiscal tax reform, which government initiated this year, it's create more financial stability or fiscal sustainable policy in the future, and it's because it's more smart and not eat all your fiscal buffers in 2-3 years, and that's why we have enough fiscal buffers to go through the this quite tight times, but we also thinking smartly to create more sustainable fiscal policy in the future. About the financial sector, banking sector is resilient. We have a lot of reform, and banking sector is resilient, substantial liquidity buffers, high asset quality, adequate capital levels, and sustained profitability indicators. Maybe it's create some social discussion when we discuss the tax code, that the banking sector too much profitable, and one of the initiative in new tax code, it's create some differentiate tax level for the banks, for example, for more the general level of income tax for business lending, and more higher tax rate for consumer lending and other businesses. And what from the NPL metrics, as Ali mentioned, we have a very, very good results. It's the aggregate level NPL total 3.5%. It's a little bit high in retail sector and lower in corporate, which is looks good, and the capital level, equity level, it's roughly about 20%. That's why it's more higher than any required levels. But what we may be thinking from the internal side, yes, we already mentioned this very, very high growth in consumer lending, and government, of course, like any government like when business lending is high and high, and as Ali mentioned, for example, in Kyrgyzstan, it's a huge share of consumer lending. The same picture here in Kazakhstan, and we made some focused macroprudential and microprudential measures together with our financial regulator, Agency for Financial Regulation and Development. We made some changes in verification of income sources, which is excluded double counting. We plan to introduce debt to income ratio, and agency make several measures also to cooling the consumer lending, and also and above of all of that, we maybe one of the first, or in a few countries in the world, we not only create the methodology but also activate so-called sectoral contracyclical buffer, especially for consumer lending exposure from the banks. We're trying to cool this consumer lending growth without touching the business lending. We see that all metrics which is Basel Committee prescribed to monitor show us that consumer lending really overheating, and we need it's a good time to create buffers in the banking sector. Banks are profitable, and it's a good time to create it. And in bad time, we should reallocate these buffers and to support the lending growth. That's why we make some focused macroprudential measures which help us also to fight with the inflation. And of course, many of these implication it's linked to the more high inflation. That's why monetary policy should be tight and data-driven, as I said. But yes, from maybe some better thing, we see a good investor confidence in Kazakhstan. Nevertheless, this all global financial uncertainty, we successfully issued sovereign Eurobonds twice this year in summer, and some recent in October issue. We see that Kazakhstan now has a BBB sovereign rating, but if we see for the indicators for the yield which Kazakhstan really issued this Eurobond, we see the levels which comparable with the single A or even double A countries, and they are much better than other BBB minus or BBB peers, and we see very good evaluation from the rating agency. Most of them affirmed or increase the outlook or increase the our sovereign rating, and it shows us more investor confidence that government and central bank on the right way and manage all these challenges quite successful.
Thank you very much, Deputy Governor. Now, Aziza, Jihad mentioned the role of the region as a connector. And recent geo-economic developments have generated fresh momentum for deeper integration among CCA countries and also with external partners. So what are some of the key initiatives you see in this regard, and how can these efforts translate into tangible outcomes?
I think, first of all, we need to acknowledge the fact that at the very high level, there are very warm relationships for several years in a row. And I think what is really interesting to see how it actually quickly translates into the new policies as well. I just would like to mention that for several years already with Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan enjoys the special regime when we can travel to each other with a domestic ID card. We don't need anymore any foreign passports. And that's very important. What we've tried to do in Uzbekistan is try to build on this momentum, and we've hosted all presidential think tanks from 5 Central Asian countries, as well as independent experts for the first regional foresight this May. And it was attempt to see beyond today, so basically Central Asia 2050. And we focused specifically on the issues of the water and climate change. The second pillar was about energy. Third was about transport and connectivity. And the last was about demographics and social components, so where we are heading to. And because we work on the assumption that the very conservative estimate of the population of the region will be 115 million, that's data from UNFPA, UN Fund for Population, it's actually going to be quite a huge market. And how we can work together, just like EU has been working very much on coal and steel, right? How can we, work together closely around our common challenges? So the water and energy, and how to make sure that we are able to maximize the outcome for everyone. As a result of it, there were very good recommendations put together by experts from around the region. But it's not enough, right? Because we also need to think about who will be living in Central Asia in 2050, and it's young people. So we also opened invitation for young people to submit essays, how they see the region of Central Asia in 2050. And we made it open for all Central Asian countries. And we received young people's view that will be hopefully reaching 40 and 50 by 2050 and 60 as well. And Together, we are publishing now the book that will actually be, available with projections, with a lot of hard data, with a lot of graphics, with a lot of figures, but also with the voices and narrative from young people that should be weaved into this hard analysis. And I have to say that the future seems to be very positive if we are able to build it today, because the foresight builds on the notion that there is no singular future, it's plural form of future, and it really depends how you are putting your action together these days. On the transport, just to give you one example, we keep hearing about the importance of middle corridor, and it's absolutely important. But there is also Trans-Afghan corridor. There is also the train, the railroad from China, Kyrgyzstan, and Uzbekistan. Maybe it's time to think about regional transportation strategy that will not make preferential treatment for one specific pathway, but rather look holistically at the interest of all actors in the region and reconcile the interest of everyone. And I think in the same fashion we could do about water, about the energy, about the maybe common labor market in future. If we want to have common labor market in future, do we need to have unified standards for education today? We do. And what I also want to tell, because it was also very prominent in the report, how we prepare technologies disruption, AI and things, but also in general, how we prepare to make sure that 115 million people will not be unhappy, but rather would have a decent job and good livelihood. We need to think about what competencies and skills they can get today. In Uzbekistan, there is a government-sponsored program. If you're getting IELTS band 7, so the 9 is maximum, the 7, you are being paid from the budget as compensation for your exam fee. And it's been massively done for many years, and by now we have 54,000 people who were reimbursed for IELTS exam test, and the target is 500,000. And if you have 7 and above, then you're getting free government-sponsored IT courses on cloud computing, DevOps, basics of AI. You're trained by government, so government is sponsoring, but private sector is training young people to get new skills. And then you can sit in Jihad, in Samarkand, in Nukuz, get training and start working without leaving your place and basically find your way. We could do much more if we start thinking as a region, and I think we have very good driver for that. It's a sport. Chess, box, and football. Uzbekistan is playing in World Cup next year, hopefully. We start seeing growing regionalism thinking. We start seeing growing regional identity that, of course, will never replace national one as a state, as a citizens. But it creates a new dimension when there is much more positivity about working together toward the future rather than just a one isolated country. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yes. Thank you for reminding us that greater connectivity and collaboration is a win-win for everyone, but that humans and investing in youth is also investing in connectivity, of course, with the technology disruption looming. We're going to conclude this conversation with you, Arif, and get your banking perspective, of course. So how do you foresee greater financial connectivity in the region, including for payment systems? And what role do you see for digital money, and how should policies be prepared for these innovations?
Thank you, Charlotte. At the moment, there are no payment systems regionally at all. And that's to do with the trade between the three main countries, I guess we are talking about. Trade between Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, I believe, is about $4.5 billion. But between Kyrgyzstan and Kazakhstan, it's about $1.5 billion. And that's also only grown in the last 3 years because of trans trade between China, Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan, Russia, and those supply chains. And between Kyrgyzstan and Uzbekistan, it's under $1 billion. So that level of trade between the three countries, I would say, and Tajikistan, I think, is even lower, does not support a payment platform. And even though in the Eurasian Economic Union, it foresaw a payment, system, but we are nowhere near it yet. Despite saying that Kyrgyzstan's two biggest trading partners are Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan, but I think it will take longer. There are, I guess, private sector efforts. Kazakhstan is working with some Kyrgyz banks to support a QR code sort of payment platform between the banks, and it's private sector led. So it's small at the moment, but that gives an idea where private sector could come in and develop a more robust platform. But I think at the moment, trade does not support. I think it will be a good idea, to be honest, because most of the countries in the region, especially Kyrgyzstan, dependent on Russia on their trade for decades. And once those supply chains dried up, the Kyrgyz people were very quick in turning around and opening up trade directly with their European partners, with their Uzbek partners and Kazakh partners, where trade volumes have grown. And as Aziza has said, I think the Kyrgyz, Chinese, Uzbek railroad will make a huge change to trade volumes, and that might promote payment systems coming in as well to support that trade. But at the moment, I think digital money and digital currency may be the best way to do this. We are at an early stage. I think Kazakhstan is obviously much further advanced. As Deputy Governor said, they're already doing digital currency. Uzbekistan is issuing licenses to cryptocurrency and other platforms. Kyrgyzstan is a little bit behind on their digital currency work, but they're getting there. The only problem is once these digital currencies are kind of developed, what happens where if it's kept with the central bank, for example, and deposits of the people are kept in digital currency with the central bank, how do the private sector banks have a credit, deposit base? And so the policies have to support that. We are issuing a lot of cryptocurrency licenses in Kyrgyzstan, but we've also suffered sanctions because of that, right? Because there is still a lot of Russian influence in Kyrgyzstan, I have to say, and that has encouraged sanctions coming in. So we have to be careful on the cryptocurrency side. I mean, our bank, for example, despite the efforts of our central bank to encourage us otherwise, we don't do any cryptocurrency banking transactions at all. We don't encourage accounts opening with us, and we don't, because we still don't understand how it's going to work and where the money is coming from and where it's going, and keeping in view Kyrgyzstan's very, very fragile correspondent banking network in euro currencies and the dollar, we have to be very careful. So that's where we are at the moment.
Well, thank you very much. Many thanks to all of you for your thoughts and insights today. We've heard from our experts here on stage. Now we're going to hear from you in the audience. It's Q&A time. We've got around 15 minutes to address all the questions you may have here in the room, but also online. We have a microphone at your disposal at the back of the room. Who has a question for our distinguished panel? Please.
Yes, good morning. My name is Uli Kinner. I'm the economic counselor at the German embassy here in Astana. And I have two questions, which mostly refer, I think, to Mr. Azour. Pleasure meeting you, sir. One is the tax reform in Kazakhstan, which contains the rise of the VAT to 16%, which to my impression seems to be the most contentious and most hotly debated part of the tax reform, and which is, if I'm not mistaken, a recommendation by the IMF, if I read your reports correctly. But I don't understand really the rationale behind this recommendation, given the overall logic of the tax reform of doing away with inefficient tax exemptions, as we've heard from the governor. So to fight inflationary pressure, but also to make the tax system more socially just by removing subsidies from which mostly people, or many people, profit who are not really socially vulnerable, and replace it by a more targeted social system. And here the VAT rise for me doesn't really fit in. Maybe you can explain the rationale of this recommendation, a decision that has been taken by Kazakhstan in the framework of the tax reform. And the second question was referring to the soft infrastructure you mentioned. Education, maybe you can elaborate on this. What exactly do you mean with a soft infrastructure? Is it, for example, technical and vocational education and training that the German government has tried to promote in the region with certain success, but still limited success, I would say?
Well, thank you very much for the two questions. I would try to be fast on both in order to cover also other questions. Look, tax reform is something that has to cover several priorities. Yes, you can always pick one element of any broad-based tax reform and focus and zoom on it. You need to build a tax system that is fair, reduce all the inefficiencies that exist in the system, special regimes, et cetera, balanced between different sources of income, and also neutral economically. I guess also in Germany, you have a tax system where the level of tax contribution is equivalent or even higher. Therefore, I think what is important for a country that is diversifying its economy is diversifying also its fiscal, and have a fiscal policy that is anchored into the medium term, eliminating some of the special regimes exemptions in order to treat the economy in a neutral way, broaden the tax base, eliminate some of the exemptions, and build the strong institutions, fiscal institutions with strong fiscal framework. And this is something that also we welcome the decision in order to have a fiscal rule or to reestablish a fiscal rule. Recent analysis is showing when you do those structural reforms, you increase the capacity of the economy to grow. And even also you reduce the cost of financing and cost of borrowing. Therefore, I think you need to look at this into a medium-term lens. Of course, there are impact on prices. And this is where moduling policies is something that governments do in the case of Kazakhstan and also other countries. The second question is, I would say, on the enablers. Okay, the state has to play a role, and a very important one, to be the enabler of the economies, providing access to talent, access to market, access to finance. Access to finance, definitely, it's something that we see that banking system in the region, and particularly in the countries that we have here in the podium, are now very well advanced. Access to finance has grown, especially recently at the retail level for consumption. I would say access to finance in terms of investment is the new frontier. In terms of venture capital, financing startups, especially that the region has some innovations, some unicorns. Therefore, I think it's very important if the region wants to play an important role as a beacon of innovation, it has to have access to finance that is correlated to that. Access to talent. We know that AI is going to have an impact on our labor. Even in advanced economy, 40% of the labor will be affected by AI. This is something that also here we have an opportunity to accelerate the education system, its transformation in order to cater for the talents. I think innovation here has been proven itself. And capacity to adapt. This region has been subjected to a massive geopolitical shock 3 years ago. And while one would have thought that growth will suffer from that, at the contrary, therefore we need to build on that. The third element that we need to build on is inclusion. Inclusion is an important dimension. Inclusion of youth, women in the economy is an important dimension. The way you increase inclusion is you remove barriers that exist in the system, strengthen institutions, you invest in education, and also you provide opportunities. Therefore, helping or changing policies toward inclusion is something that is very relevant to the region, including on the social side. Spending is also one of the main drivers for social inclusion. By having a subsidy system that is focused on needs, not a broad-based, where it's targeted, where it's income dependent. And this would help a region, this region that is growing now at fairly good rate to maintain this over the medium term. The last point that I would come to it is deepening financial markets by increasing the level of integration in the region is one of the important dimensions. We may not see CBDC at the retail level growing, but we could see CBDC at the at the wholesale level growing in the region. We could see also deepening of the financial markets that would allow capital to flow, including in terms of fixed income, not only in terms of equity. Therefore, I think there are avenues where the region can accelerate its transformation. In addition to the hard infrastructure, this is what I call the soft infrastructure.
I'm sure. I'm happy to talk about the role of the service economy, including the creative industries. But I thought the social infrastructure would be much more about regulations, making sure that it's not only hard railway being built, but it's also, the tariff system, or how we actually, let it go quickly. Looking at the risk of corruption and other things across the region would help really benefit. And one of the very good examples would be, if we talk about hopefully the region being more integrated together and people start even more traveling and also goods traveling, perhaps we should also think what type of capacity to process the customs checkpoints should have. Maybe instead of just 2 very narrow ways, maybe it should be 6, 8, and 10. And that actually emerged in the discussion of the ambassador of Kazakhstan in Uzbekistan. We were, working on the foresight. We invited ambassadors to present the idea, and he actually raised this issue that instead of thinking only about the hard, it should come together with a soft infrastructure, meaning how to ease the processes, cut the red tape, and make sure we are thinking not as of tomorrow, but actually the week after. So 2030, 2040, 2050, what we need to make sure that this simplification comes in addition to hard infrastructure. That could be something that would be enabling. Thank you.
Thank you for that. We just talked about soft infrastructure and cooperation. It's from Kasimkhan Kaparov, who is the Executive Director of the Central Asia Development Institute. And with regards to regional connectivity, the question is the following. Can it help solve domestic, social and economic issues in the region? And if so, what role should it play in the national government's agendas?
I think the answer is in the question. Look, let me give you a few examples. The level of convergence of the region compared to the convergence of the emerging East European countries is still showing that there are gaps. Okay, how to accelerate those inclusions? By not only addressing the infrastructure, but also addressing the cooperation. Still, if you want to move from one city to another, in certain cases, you have to go to a hub that exists outside the region. I think this is something that can easily be done, especially that the infrastructure now is there in terms of ports, in terms of airports, highways. This is something that could play a very good way of increasing integration, aligning some of the rules in terms of, especially if you want to develop the role of the region as a connector. If you can have one clearing system of all custom transactions coming from China crossing the whole region. Also, there are certain linkages that needs to be addressed. I think the opportunity today is it has re-emerged, not only because of the fragmentation that we are seeing at the geopolitical level, but also some of the improvements. I think the speakers mentioned it. The fact that the cooperation between head of states and between different administrations have been becoming something regular and very effective. Building on that would allow to build more and seamless way of removing barriers, especially the soft ones, and creating opportunities.
Thank you for that. The lady in green, I believe, had a question.
Yes, I don't have a microphone, but I'll try to.
There it is.
Good morning. My name is Dinara. I am Executive Director of the United Nations Global Compact for Central Asia. And I have two questions. Great discussion, I appreciate it. So first question to Ms. Aziza Umarova. Last week I was in Uzbekistan, great country, I love it, and visited Samarkand, Bukhara, really impressive things that you are doing there. I deal with the private sector in Uzbekistan, and my question is, what areas of sustainable development the Uzbekistan government prioritizes to get the private sector involved, and where you see maybe the role of the private sector? You spoke about infrastructure, about education, about all these other initiatives, but private sector can play a big role. It's already playing. So from the government point of view, which areas are most important? And my second question is to Mr. Deputy Governor Baimagambetov. In Kazakhstan, you've increased base rate for consecutive, how many times, I believe. And so the concerns of the private sector, which I'm trying to voice out, is constantly increasing base rate, cuts access of the private sector to capital. And a lot of businesses are suffering without access to not only for investment capital, but for working capital. How do you balance this? Because eventually, if you limit growth of the private sector, it will impact the overall development of the economy. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think there is still a lot to be done in terms of really integrating sustainable development into the development of the private sector. And on that one, we will be working on the social impact investment and how to make sure we have more structured way to address this, because this discussion just emerges right now when we are thinking how to approach it. But at the basic level, I would like to say that I think priority that is very clearly articulated right now in Uzbekistan is to generate more jobs. And I think I mentioned this before as well, because we have, very high growth of population. And what government is trying to do that to make sure that we enable private sector to hire formally and pay formally as many people as possible, but also more and more emphasis on women. And I think one of the drivers in this would be, for example, textile industry. In Namangan city alone, we have more than 2,000 textile companies. And by the way, if you don't know, we are competing on the global market with Bangladesh on the men's suit market. We are competition to Bangladesh on the men's suit for European big retail stores and big companies and brands. Bugatti, the outerwear is done in Namangan. Excellent quality. And this is very much thanks to government actually allowing to have, investment readily available to private sector to do it. However, it's more than that. It really depends how we're going to promote the market. So we have, for example, now the first generation of people who've been able to do the very good family-run businesses. And textile, in a lot of cases, it's a family-run businesses. But then to really have a leapfrog, you should really make sure that these people know how to do the proper boards, how to do wealth management, strategies, how you incorporate professional CFOs and CEOs in the family business, just like Germans and, by the way, Austrians did long time ago. So how to make this family businesses a new, leapfrog of the tiger. And for that, you need to have a separate strategy, right? Or we just leave them where they are And then the family businesses, a classic Uzbek case of businesses, the small and medium size, just collapse with some time because of the inability to cope with it. So what we are trying to do now is more jobs. What we need to do more is about environmental impact, looking into the way to do reconciliation of the production with the sustainable environment around us. But I think what is also needed to be more targeted in the way which areas should be prioritized for support of the business. Not everything is the same, not 5 fingers are the same. And for that one, I think what I mentioned before as well, this geoportal with social infrastructure will provide very granular understanding which district, which mahalla should be prioritized in the first 5 years and what can wait a bit more. And on that one, we are working with the Ministry of Employment and Poverty Reduction. Thank you.
Thank you for question. It's always quite tough questions when you try to explain how base rate affect the inflation and how it works together. But you can imagine when your inflation is almost 30% and economy grown more than 6%, 6.5%. It's not in a situation when economy not developed. Economy is developed and it's the highest GDP growth rate for 10 years or more in Kazakhstan. It means that economy overheating. And if we see on a loan portfolio growth metrics, it's double digit in percentage term. And it's not only the consumer loan portfolio growing. Yes, we are trying to cool, and it's a focused measures to cool the maybe consumer lending portfolio to provide more space for business loans, for more space for growing business loans. The same measures done by government when they introduced this different tax level for consumer lending and business lending for the banks. All these measures trying to support the more access funds to the businesses and maybe to cool a little bit the consumer. We try to put the water out of this bag without putting the child from that. We try that we understand the consumer lending. It's also very important for the trade as a industry in economy, but we see that economy growing not only for the mining. Mining, it's not growing too fast in economy. Maybe more in other sectors like in services, transportation, it's also due to this middle corridor, etc., some others. Yes, some businesses compliant, but if you see on the figures, the economy growing very, very fast. Yes, as Jihad said, before this digitalization, it's also about the connectivity in economy, soft infrastructure. If you see on Kazakhstan, it's a good example how this digitalization changed our life. I would like to make this maybe small remark to previous question about the connectivity, soft infrastructure, etc. You can imagine through the banking app you can marriage, you can register a car, you can make many. It's change mood of our life. Now, to be honest, people in big cities in Kazakhstan don't imagine their life without the smartphones. Maybe it's good, maybe it's not good, but it's also boost the economy. But of course, it's also boost the consumer lending. It's now lend to somebody. It's in an issue of few seconds, maybe minutes. You can print a payment card in 1 minute in a banking shop. It's incredible. It's incredible. 5-10 years ago, you cannot imagine all these things. It's really changed our life. Yes, it's also this growth, unfortunately, come with more high inflation. Some structural reform is bring not only some brighter future, but pro-inflationary short-term effects. But we should fight with them. We should support the socially vulnerable people. It's of course it's maybe one of the important issue of government task. But also this all digitalization, it's bring the tools to the government how to indicate, how to find the right people to whom they should support. But all our measures, it's aimed to fight with inflation. Inflation, it's a very complicated economic process which is hurt mostly the social vulnerable people. They hurt most from the inflation. It's not about the some damage for rich people. It's the first damage from the high inflation. It's for social vulnerable people. That's why it's our main task, and we try to we fight with the inflation. We see these short-term pro-inflationary factors, but all our measures it's aimed to fight with inflation. And that's why now we co-align policies, not only monetary policy, but as I mentioned before, we also use some macro-prudential policies which aimed to strengthen the buffers through the banks, but also to cool this consumer lending and provide more spending, more space, more room for business lending.
Thank you very much, Deputy Governor. We need to wrap up, unfortunately, but I'd like to ask the panel to conclude, maybe to identify one word, the key word that will define the future of the CCA region. What's essential here, in one word? Opportunity. Aziza.
Potential.
I would say digitalization.
Digitalization.
Seizing the opportunity through digitalization.
So many thanks to our distinguished experts. Many thanks to you, of course, in the audience as well, for your attention and your engagement during the Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And we would like to invite everybody to join us for some coffee outside and continue the discussion bilaterally, please.
Thank you, Norbert. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, nice to meet you.